Good evening once again, and welcome back to the Ideas Exchange, where we are discussing the recent transition in Zimbabwe with the Honorable Member of Parliament for North Tongu, Honorable Samuel Akujeto Ablakwa, and our immediate past ambassador to the Republic of Zimbabwe, Ambassador Sylvanus Tamaklo. Before the break, we had gone into some detail as to the surprise and perhaps the not so surprising event of the transition. And now we're going to explore in more detail what goes next. And so, Ambassador Tamaklo, I'd like to address my next question to you. When you think of the process that has taken place so far, it appears to me that the military in Zimbabwe acted, if you like, as a midwife to a smooth transition from one president to the next. But given the fact that now President Mnangagwa had been sacked as vice president and was not the sitting vice president at the time when all of this happened, what is it within the constitutional arrangement in Zimbabwe that allowed for this transition process to be executed the way it was done? Because one would have thought that the issue of succession, even when President Mugabe was recalled by his party, was still a matter that may have been a bit more controversial than we have seen playing out on our screens.
I see. First of all, we need to realize that the military is a part of the ruling party, ZANU-PF. They fought together, came from the bush, and were assimilated into the new defense force. So Zimbabwe Defense Force always has a say in the way the party is run. And per their constitution, the vice president takes over when something happens to the president, either death or dismissal. The vice president is the one who takes over. And when President Mugabe was recalled by the party reinstated the vice president. And by virtue of that, he was in a position to become the president. So it was that simple.
Well, then in that case, it tells us that they have a lot of power to do a lot of things, assuming the surrounding circumstances allow for that. From your perspective, Honorable Ablakwa, do you think that there are lessons to be learned from the way in which the military intervened, not so much as to execute a coup d'etat, but to protect the constitutional democracy of Zimbabwe? Because effectively, that is what they have been seen to do.
Yes, effectively, that is what they have done. But I will still urge caution. We should not make. We should.
No, don't get me wrong. We're not advocating for that kind of.
Yes, it's important. It's important.
We're just looking at making observations.
Yes. I agree with you. But it's important that we all make the point that this kind of military experimentation should, as much as possible, be avoided. We should work to build internal democratic mechanisms that address the concerns that we have. I think that the ZANU-PF, as a political party, should have been more proactive in foreseeing the events of the last few days, and so putting in place a succession plan, making it clear to the towering Pan-African icon, Comrade Mugabe, who we all, hold in high esteem for what he's done for the continent of Africa and for the black race generally. But they should have put in place a more rigorous system that will have prevented Comrade Mugabe from staying in, from really overstaying his welcome. I think that if that had been done, then the military would not have had to do what they've done, because it's not a great example, because you do not know how this will pan out if there had not been this greater understanding behind the scenes, because I'm clear in my mind that people had talked to each other and they had come to a certain agreement on how they wanted to execute this military intervention. You may not be lucky in other countries in the continent to have that kind of backroom communication and agreement, and then execution to perfection, as has happened, where it was bloodless, where there was really no adventurer who took advantage, because a power-drunk military general could have just, in the last minute when everything appears successful, just have hijacked the process and said that, look, I am taking over, and Comrade Mnangagwa would not have emerged. So it's still a very risky, route to take, except to say that these checks and balances to help. The other side of the argument, the other side of the coin, is that all leaders should know that you cannot outwit everybody and outsmart everybody. You and your spouses and everybody close to you, your loyalists, should know that there are always checks and balances in the system. You have the military, you have your political party that gave you the platform. And so always make sure that you cannot consider yourself all-knowing and all, mighty, just to perpetrate yourself, forever. So I would say that really we should all look at strengthening our constitutions, internal constitutions, party constitutions, internal democratic mechanisms. There should be vigorous debate. You shouldn't have a situation where one man becomes the law, and what he says and what he wants is what everybody must fall for. It appears to me that that is what happened to ZANU-PF until they woke up a few days ago. We shouldn't have gotten to where we got to.
And also, to add to that, we must also realize that the faction called G40 supporting Grace Mugabe had party stalwarts. The chairman of the party belonged to that group. Professor Jonathan Moyo, a stalwart, was there, and other party people. So it was going to be very difficult for the party to have really been successful in advising President Mugabe as to what to do, because there's a faction, a very powerful faction, and they were regarded as the technocrats, the very educated ones. They were supporting Grace Mugabe, so it was very difficult for the party to come out.
Viewers, you're watching the Ideas Exchange on TV XYZ, and you're going to hear it live on Radio XYZ. You can join us through our various social media platforms. You're seeing them displayed on your TV screen right now. And this program is brought to you by African Life Assurance. And now we'll continue with our conversation. So, Honorable Ablakwa, we've seen the transition. We now have President Mnangagwa. In his address to the nation, his first address to the nation, after being sworn into office, there were a couple of points that he made that were quite interesting. For me, one of the preeminent ones was the issue with land reform, that it was not negotiable, and that they were not going to be in a position to go back on that. But at the same time, indicating a commitment to democracy, indicating that the election scheduled for next year would come on, and more or less asking to be reintegrated into the community of nations. If you look at what played out for us during his swearing in, and you were to try and project going forward, what do you think would be the way forward over the next few months?
It's clear to me that the new president, listening to him carefully at his inauguration, he wants to be a reformer. There's clearly an economic challenge that confronts the country now because of all the sanctions and all the barricades that they had faced within the international community. We are told that unemployment is hovering at 90%.
90%.
That is terrible. He has said that jobs will be the one thing he will prioritize. He has also indicated that he wants a return to the international community where Zimbabwe is not seen as a pariah, so that they can be heard, they can attract investors, and that the business community will look towards Zimbabwe with a favorable outlook. The challenge, however, is that listening to economists, we are told that there is serious liquidity challenge. And so he has such a short time. Expectations too are so high. I listen to the word on the streets, the youth. It's a very vibrant population, very enlightened people, well educated. And if you listen to the expectations, they want reforms immediately. They want virtually paradise to be created. That is going to be his challenge. How does he manage these expectations? Remember too that unfortunately for him, he has just about 10 months to go before the next elections. He will have to also, he's clearly interested. You can see he will run. So he will have to quickly get to campaign mode. When you get to campaign mode, running the country and following up on getting the reforms done, may have to wait until you are elected. And so then the expectations, how do you manage it? We have seen countries where there have been jubilation and all of that. There's a lot of hope in the new leadership, but it fizzles out so quickly, and it becomes a danger to the new leader. So he needs to watch that. But I see that there is some goodwill that he has within the international community. Looking at the statements that have come from the various foreign services across the world, it's clear to me that he will get some support. Except that the way he addressed the land issue to the West, President Mugabe was a darling boy until he took over the lands and redistributed them to the indigenes, to Zimbabweans. That really was the turning point for the relationship that Mugabe had with the Western nations. Now, President Mnangagwa has said that is non-negotiable, except that he's willing to address compensation issues. Yeah. The challenge, however, is that there's an economic crunch. There is liquidity problem. So where are you going to get that money from? Unless the Bretton Woods move in. If they are fortunate to get an IMF or World Bank intervention, and they can get some liquidity to address compensation so that the Western nations decide to, okay, we want to now come back to you. Our investors can now look to your country. We can now trade with you because Zimbabwe has a lot of natural resources. Then it will help, and he can meet expectations, and the democratic transition, the fresh page he's talking about within a democratic arrangement can happen. But it's a very, very difficult time for any leader to assume the reins of a country. It's a very difficult time. Isolated for a long time. You have liquidity challenges. You have such a huge unemployment, 90%. And what makes it worse is that they are the most educated people, yet they don't have jobs. And so, and expectations are that high, so high. It's quite a toxic mix, and I don't know how he's going to manage. We can only wish him well, but he has his work cut out for him. It's going to be interesting to see how he also forms his cabinet. Is he going to be a unifier and even reach out to the movement for democratic change and other opposition parties and try to bring them on board? I think if he does that, it will be good. And then reach out to even the factions within ZANU-PF who were supporting Madam Grace Mugabe. He himself has set the tone that there should be no vengeance, and that everybody should let the past be behind them. He had said when he went to South Africa on exile that he felt his life was under threat. If he himself, with that kind of background and experience says that, look, let's put the past behind, let's not be vengeful. And he means it and sets good example by making sure that the cabinet that he forms is made up of very competent people who can deliver within this short time, and who also represent all the various, factions and segments of the Zimbabwean society. That will help. But I must add finally that I thought that it was quite a low point that they couldn't really convince and get President Mugabe to attend the inauguration. It would really have been beautiful if he did that. The official statement from Comrade Mugabe's office is that he was too tired to attend the function. I know that because of all the jubilation and all of that, he may have felt a bit unsafe to get into that gathering, but at least an effort should have been made, or there should have been. So far we haven't seen the two of them sit, at least, even if it's just photo ops, that, he's consulting with him, he really has his blessings. I think that it will be nice in calming down tensions, because Mugabe will still have his supporters and will still have his loyalists. So these are some of the things that I think that they have to work on moving forward.
Which brings me to my next question, Ambassador Tamaklo. President Mnangagwa essentially has been part of the establishment in Zimbabwe since its independence. And therefore, how capable would he be of managing this transition? And I'm asking the question because when you've been part of an establishment and you have taken decisions that have been executed, the fact that there has been a change in the administration and you now have the leadership doesn't actually give you the luxury of saying that you may have disagreed with this policy in the past, especially when you were influential enough to have a seat at the table and to say it. And I recognized when President Mugabe gave his last very rambling television address, he was emphasizing the point that certain actions were taken that were collective decisions, almost as if, whatever it is that has happened in the past, it's not just me, it is all of us who have been part of it. So looking at the fact that this is now a country in transition, getting ready for elections, and as Honorable Ablakwa said, there's so much expectation. And it is not necessarily going to be the case that you might see Western countries immediately responding positively to a transition in Zimbabwe in terms of making financial assistance available. Zimbabwe previously had friends, in spite of the fact that they were under sanction and in spite of the fact that they were undergoing so much stress. How do you think President Mnangagwa, from your knowledge of the country, is going to manage the transition going forward? And how much role will these friends play in that process?
I think it's a catch-22 situation. I find President Mnangagwa in a very difficult position. The first issue has to do with land reforms. He said they were not going to reverse the land reforms. There was nothing else he could have said but that. Anything else would have had the war veterans rising up against him. But he also added that they were going to pay compensation. I think it's a very good point. So I believe they can sit down and arrange compensations to be paid. But as to how they'll fund it is another thing. I believe friendly nations like China and Russia might come in to help them resolve that issue. This whole thing about land reforms is at the center of Zimbabwe's problems. And if it is not handled carefully, they might get into worse waters than is happening now. Now, as to President Mnangagwa being part of the system since independence, yes, it's true, he's been part of the system. But like if a cabinet takes a decision, whether you agree to a decision or not, you are always bound by that decision. So I believe, yes, he would have been part of decisions taken, but he can exonerate himself easily. That it was a collective decision, and if he wanted to abstain, that doesn't mean that he shouldn't go by decisions taken. So I don't find that will be a problem at all. Already he stated that they should let bygones be bygones. They should not look back and move forward. I think it's going to be a very difficult era because of the expectations of Zimbabweans. But the issue of land is going to come back. The British might not accept what is being said now. But personally, there's no other way. You cannot reverse the land reforms. You just have to find a way. That is why it is very good they are looking at paying compensations now. It's going to be a very, very dicey road because of resources to manage this thing. Zimbabwe is not yet out of the woods. They're still going to have to really negotiate their way out carefully, because there are structural defects, and to put such a system back together will take time. As to whether the general populace will understand that it will take time to mend is another issue. I believe President Mnangagwa will reach out to the opposition. I think he should. I think he should bring somebody like Joyce Mujuru back, the former vice president. I think he should reach out to MDC led by Morgan Tsvangirai. He should form an all-inclusive government for now. He should open up the press. There's only one TV station. I believe they should open up. They should get transparent. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Talking about the opposition led by Morgan Tsvangirai, you would recall that there have been a lot of controversies with regard to Zimbabwe's elections. And I'm sure that now that there has been a transition to President Mnangagwa, one of the things that the opposition is going to be concerned about is what platform is going to be created for the next election to be truly competitive and free and fair, so that the voice of the people is reflected in the choices that they make. Knowing the challenges that Zimbabwe has had previously with elections, what do you think are a couple of the issues that they are going to have to address in order to regain confidence in the electoral process?
The first one should be electoral reforms, far-reaching reforms.
Such as?
Such as counting of ballots at the polling stations. They've got to address issues about the register. They've got to address...
They don't count the ballots at the polling stations?
No. They've got to start doing that. Transparent ballot boxes. All the electoral reforms would have to be taken on board as quickly as possible.
From what you're saying, it appears as if the elections were conducted in such a way that there was one preferred outcome that was to be obtained anyway.
Looks like that. But I must tell you that our process in Ghana, election process in Ghana, is very transparent. I believe it's about one of the best in the world. In other countries, you don't find it that way. So they would have to really go into that, seek international assistance to make sure that it is as transparent as possible.
We're coming to just about the end of the show, but in your final comments, how do you see, from your experience of Zimbabwe, from the period of time that you've lived there and you've had the opportunity to interact with so many different stakeholders, how do you see them being able to manage this process successfully? What do you think is going to be, what can we expect as the outcome getting towards the next election, realistically?
Realistically, I think because of the level of education, I think they'll steer the ship carefully, and not without troubles though, but they'll steer the ship carefully, because even the process leading to this was carefully handled. It just tells you the caliber of people who handled it. Very educated people, and that has really affected them positively. I have a strong belief that they will be able to steer this ship successfully.
Honorable Ablakwa, from your perspective, and I know that political parties across the continent do have contacts with each other and do share ideas and exchanges on perhaps the respective challenges that they've gone through and how they've been able to manage those challenges. If you were to project going forward, again, you are taking more the view of an outsider looking in. Yeah. What are the kind of things that you think they could learn from us and the processes that we have gone through as we have strengthened our democracy over the years that would benefit them and help them to have a credible outcome of the next election?
First suggestion I will make is that the IPAC arrangement in Ghana really helps, where you bring all the political parties to sit around the table. If you listen to Morgan Tsvangirai, he always complains that they do not know what to expect. They go into the election and things are not clear. So to solve that, follow the Ghanaian model, have an IPAC arrangement, bring everybody to the table. Morgan Tsvangirai himself is battling with cancer, so we don't know if he will put himself forward, but involve all of them. Let everybody come to the table. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think at this point, Zimbabwe really needs a third-party actor, a neutral actor that comes in from outside. If it's going to be SADC or it's going to be the African Union. Recently in Ghana, the Center for Democratic Transitions has been formed, and it's made up of people that you can really respect. They've done a good job in the Zambia, in Liberia, Gambia, and other places. A group like that, inviting them, and there's confidence amongst all the key political actors that these are neutrals who don't have a vested interest on who wins, who guides the transition. It's very, very important. And for President Mnangagwa's own, for his own sake, because of the long history of ZANU, the perception that ZANU-PF is always trying to skew things. I'm not too sure that it may necessarily be the case, because these independent parties are very strong because of what they achieve. CPP was invincible, for a long time. You see the ANC largely invincible, despite, President Zuma's, flaws. It's going to be difficult in the foreseeable future to break that stranglehold that the ANC has. And I see ZANU-PF to be safe. These independent liberation parties are so strong. So I'm not one who thinks that if there is a free and fair election, ZANU-PF as a political party will not stand a chance. So it should be in their interest to open up. Let's see more support from other countries within the continent and other bodies, especially the African Union, which is close by, whose headquarters is close by. Let's see them get in. And there's a lot of expertise in the continent on transitions and democratic matters that can be brought on board. Because at this point, you really do need an independent actor who everybody has confidence in. And once that confidence is secured, you can expect that moving forward, you have an electoral outcome that everybody will largely agree to, and then Zimbabwe can move to the next level. But certainly tough times, but I will say that this should not be the time for sitting back, especially within the African continent. Let's reach out to them. That's why I have said, I'm on record to have said that there's nothing wrong with even extending a hand of invitation to Comrade Mugabe if he wants to consider a place to rest. I'm not surprised really that he didn't go for the inauguration. Clearly he will want to, be away for a while. And it spares everybody, the tensions and wondering what's going on and all of that. And it will be nice because of what he's done for the Pan-African movement, what he's done for the black race, for countries like Ghana, where he's worked before, where he took his inspiration, inspired by Nkrumah and all of that, to be seen also contributing and offering our hand of support in this time of need. I get worried when always the assistance must come from other continents, from the West, from China, from Russia. Let's take the lead. Let the African Union take the lead. Let SADC take the lead. And let's work out an arrangement. Let's be seen assisting them. Yes, we respect their sovereignty. Zimbabwean problems must be addressed by Zimbabweans. But you don't sit back as good neighbors and as brotherly and sisterly countries, we should all get involved and see how we help Zimbabwe get back on its feet.
And to add to it, I would want to appeal to the Bretton Woods institution to handle Zimbabwe's case as a different case. The prescription must be different from the general prescriptions they give. Zimbabwe is different. It is unique. For Zimbabwe to get out of this, the Bretton Woods institutions would have to handle it in a different way. I would also want to appeal to China to step in and for once show that they want the good of Africa. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that has been this week's edition of the Ideas Exchange. I'd like to thank my guests, Honorable Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, and also Ambassador Sylvanus Tamaklo, the immediate past ambassador of Ghana to Zimbabwe. It's an interesting subject. The situation is still unfolding. We don't quite know what the final outcome will be, but what we do know is that we will continue to watch this space until the next election and wish them well in their process of transition. It's the end of the era for President Mugabe. It's the beginning of a new future for Zimbabwe. And as fellow Africans, we can only wish them the best and every success in their endeavors, especially as they come to grips with some of their most difficult challenges and with the challenges that they will face in the future. This has been the Ideas Exchange. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. It was sponsored by African Life Assurance. You are still welcome to continue to engage us online on our social media platforms, and let us have your points of view as well. And let us also know the kind of things that you'd like us to cover in this program, because we want to make it something that is receptive to our viewers and helps you to understand issues on which you would want to have a bit more detail, bringing some of the people who are very knowledgeable to sit and to be our guests and to explain how these things have evolved and what actually is happening, so that we have a better understanding of the world around us. Thank you, good night, and be my guest again next week.